All right, welcome everyone to our COVID-19 Junior Support for Y1. I am Raven Foster,
Hey everyone, Michael T.
and we're going to be walking you through our presentation on personal statements today. So our agenda, first we're going to talk about the why, the what, the who. Then we're going to jump into the how, the do's and don'ts of writing a personal statement. We're going to engage in some of the checklists that we've created for students and for teachers. You're going to have some practice with developing drafts and some essay examples. And then we're going to discuss next steps.
Awesome. Let's talk about why personal statements are important. For many institutions, college essays are going to be a necessary part of the application process that allows the applicant to showcase who they are, who they want to become, and what assets they can bring to the institution. What's going to be your value add while you're there? Which institutions is it going to be particularly important for? So if you're applying through Common App for maybe an out-of-state institution, or if you're looking at one of the more selective, more competitive institutions here in Texas, like UT, Texas A&M, and other competitive four-year universities, a personal statement is going to be pretty important for you. For a full list of Apply Texas schools that have either mandatory or optional personal statements or essays, you could click on this link here.
And then who can benefit from personal statements? Well, students who are applying to more competitive four-year universities that do not meet assured admissions at their institution of interest, or are applying for scholarships. And I just want to really quickly say, if you are applying to a more competitive four-year university, personal statements are the things that can sometimes set you apart from other candidates. So this is a really, really valuable portion of your application.
All right, so let's talk about the how. What are the do's and the don'ts of writing a personal statement? I'm going to cover the do's really quickly. So the first thing is to start early. You don't want to cram in an essay that's supposed to share your story for a midnight deadline on the day that it's due, right? And you don't want to do that for any part of your application, really, whether it's letters of recommendation or transcripts. So the key here is to start early, reduce that level of stress. The second one I really highlighted, it's going to show up later on our examples, which is to have a narrative and talk about your story. Remember, your statistics, whether they're SAT scores or ACT scores or GPA, your class rank, that's part of your academic success. But then the interviewers for like a scholarship board or the admissions officers at a college, they really want to know what's your story, what's your motivation. Make sure to include details like sensory details, taste and smell. So smell, for example, is really hard to write about, but actually it's the sense that's most linked to your memory. Think about like grandma's cookies, for example, right? So these images, these emotions start to waft into your head as if you could smell those cookies. And then talk about the relationships between objects, people, and you. Don't make any assumptions that the reader is just going to know what it's like to have several younger siblings, for example. Talk about your role within your family. Focus on something small is really important. So really, again, be very detail oriented. Think about the small things that really paints an image for your story, and be able to brand yourself. When you're sharing your story, characteristics like enthusiasm or courage or grit or determination, those things should be evident within your story. Show how awesome you are is very related to that. Number 7 is to be honest. And number 8 is to discuss in detail the impact it had on you, what you learned, how you applied what you learned, and what you accomplished or hope to accomplish. So this is going to be pretty important. It's almost like a 30-70 split, where 30% of your story should be centered on like kind of the what happened, and then the 70% should be focused on what you learned from it or how you applied it.
So let's jump into some of the don'ts. 1, you do not want to restate your resume. As Michael just shared, you want to brand yourself. You want to be memorable and show how awesome you are. So if you just restate your resume, which is something that the reader can probably read on a different document, it doesn't make you very memorable, right? So just don't restate your resume. Go into detail about some of your experiences. 2, don't talk too much about your weaknesses. We all have weaknesses, but the reader, the college admissions counselor who may be reading this doesn't want to only know about your weaknesses. So make sure you avoid talking too much about it. It's okay if you mention them, but you want to make sure you elaborate further on what you learned as a result of that weakness or the impact that it had on you in a positive way. Number 3, do not focus on elementary or middle school experiences. I'm sure, have probably had some really great experiences then, but we want to focus more on high school because those experiences are probably more closely related to what you may engage in college. Do not focus too much on a game or a person that isn't you. Like we were talking about earlier, grandma's cookies, your grandmother may have had a really great impact on you, right? But you don't want to focus your entire personal statement on your grandmother. You want to talk about how your grandmother may have impacted your life. This is about you. Do not show only what college will do for you. We know that you probably really want to get into the school that you're applying for. Your college admissions counselors want to hear about your life, not necessarily what you think the college will do for your life. It says lack of structure. We want to make sure that it looks like you can write, right? So we want to make sure that your essay is structured. Do not be cliche or corny. Avoid maybe a bunch of quotes, things that you may see other people say just to make it look really pretty. Make it unique to you. Make it your story. Do not be something you're not that is very tied into telling the truth. You don't want to have to back up a lie, right? Make sure you are telling the truth. And then don't leave it at the experience and assume that the reader will know how it affected you, what you learned from it, how you apply what you learned, and what you accomplished. You have to be the protagonist. You have to tell your story.
I'm going to go over the student checklist. So when you are doing your research on institutions and scholarships, make sure you do your background research and figure out what's important to those institutions and scholarship. Is it like leadership, or is it community service? Is it athletics? Do you need to talk about a specific experience that's going to help enhance those values that they are searching for? And then know what the question or prompt is asking and be sure to take it to another level. And then my suggestion is always to free write. Sometimes we hit a writer's block and that's absolutely fine. But just writing for 7 minutes, typing or going old school and picking up pen and paper. For me, I like to draw like little maps or outlines to help organize my thoughts. For example, for other people, they're just putting word vomit and just putting everything that they can on there. And that's absolutely perfectly fine too. And then drafting is an iterative process, which means that it's not one and done. So you might write something down and out of everything you wrote down, it's really that one sentence that you really need to iterate on, that you need to elaborate on, that you need to build on. Figure out what that important material is, and it's going to take you a few times to get to there. And then have a conversation with someone who can help you dig deeper. It's a lot easier sometimes to have someone look over your work and kind of see where the gaps are and where the strengths are. So some of those gaps and strengths, they might be your grammar and punctuation, and maybe someone just needs to proofread it and do a little bit of revision. Other times we might need to dig deeper. So like, what are the strongest parts of your essay? What parts can be dropped or enhanced? And did you discuss the impact? And then the last 2 steps, which is to review your application and ensure that your essay enhances your application. Kind of like what Raven said earlier, it doesn't need to be a repetition of your resume. It needs to be able to enhance your application. And then finally, you could hit that submit button and hopefully you get the scholarship or you get the acceptance letter that you are searching for.
Now, teachers, we created this just for you. We know that it is sometimes easier when you know, here are the steps that I need to do to make sure that my students can be the most productive at this task. So we wanted to make sure we created a checklist in reference to guiding kids through that process. So one, you want to make sure that you understand the requirements for whatever assignment students are working on, whether that is a scholarship, whether they are actually applying to a college. What are the word limits? What are the prompts? What are the due dates? So that you can better guide students to accomplish the task. Secondly, as Michael just mentioned on the student checklist, you want to really prompt kids to engage in this free write process so that they can just get all of their thoughts on paper and then formulate them into some sort of structure later. 7 minutes is what we recommend to do that, but of course it is up to you for how long you want that to happen. And then finally, in that feedback piece where kids are going to solicit that from you in terms of editing or revising, we have written down a few steps that you may want to think about following. 1, soliciting student feedback about their own writing. It is important for kids to self-assess what they've created, right? So questions that you could ask. What are the strongest parts of your essay? What parts can be dropped or enhanced? And did you discuss the impact or the lessons learned? The second thing that you want to make sure that you're doing as you're giving feedback is evaluating how that essay looks and how it sounds, the grammar, the punctuation, the word choice. And finally, consider maybe how it can be improved. Does certain parts of the essay contribute to the essay overall? Are these parts integral, redundant, tangential? These are good questions to ask as you're engaging in this feedback process with you.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is when I think back to all the essays that I've given feedback on is, as a teacher, you might have this tendency to try to fix all those things. No, don't do that, right? Hit the brakes. Make sure that the student understands what the process is about. And then also make sure that the student is able to retain their own voice, right? Because we don't want an over-polished essay it's really evident that an adult did it, right? We want the student to be proud of their story and be able to share their story. And that, I think, is actually super important.
Really good point.